This week, we talk about our biggest press release pet peeves. Then Surag Patel, Chief Security Officer at Contrast Security, joins us to talk about why less is more for static application scanning. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Wiz raises $250 million at a staggering $6 billion valuation. Gretel AI, another privacy engineering startup, raises $50 million. ForcePoint acquires BitGlass. Yubico releases a new line of biometric security keys. Facebook releases an open source tool for analyzing mobile app code. Venture capital needs to clear its plate or it can't have any pudding. Maritime security has a lot of security work to do, and don't forget to stick around for the Weekly Squirrel. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. When it comes to your network, visibility is imperative because you can't secure what you can't see. Riverbed's network performance management solution gives you 100% network visibility 100% of the time. Now you can resolve performance issues and security threats up to 90% faster and reduce response time, damage, and cost spent on remediation and containment efforts. Connect with Riverbed today and learn how their NPM solution can protect your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Riverbed. Whether your biggest cybersecurity concern is ransomware, unprotected network devices, zero trust success, or auditing your supply chains, firmware security is critical. Eclipsium's enterprise firmware security platform helps you identify devices and their firmware, verify the integrity of firmware wherever it's used, and fortify firmware through active remediation and automated patching. Visit securityweekly.com/Eclipsium to try out Eclipsium or learn more about enterprise firmware security.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. This is episode 246, recorded on Wednesday, October 13th, 2021. Yes, I did get that right. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and today is National Emergency Nurses Day. Thank you to all the nurses that deal with the biggest emergency in most people's lives, literally. Joining me today is Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Hey, it's good to be here, Adrian.
That's a new thing I'm throwing in is... looking at so I started out okay, let's do something silly, and I might with future ones, because there's all these today's National Peach Cobbler Day and stuff like that.
You know what tomorrow is?
What?
It's National Father's, Brother's, Nephew's, Cousin's, Former Roommate Day. Did you get that reference?
No.
Spaceballs.
No, I did not get
Spaceballs.
Oh, wow, okay. It's been a while. I was like, there's something that's way too specific.
Yes,
there's something I'm not getting there.
A line from Spaceballs.
But yeah, I saw that, they've had a heck of a year, 2 years. So I was like, I gotta give a shout out there.
Absolutely.
To emergency room nurses.
Yeah, it's a different day that every day there's a day dedicated to something.
Yeah, no, like tons of stuff per day. It gets crazy. And there's a SOC Analyst Appreciation Day coming up.
There is, next Wednesday.
Yep, week from today. And ESW will be part of that. So really excited about that.
It's going to be fun.
Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. Keynotes from Alyssa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, and Dave Kennedy. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register and check out our Rockstar lineup. All right. And for our first segment today.
I was also, during this segment too, let's not forget to talk about John's tweet, which I really love. That you and I both analyzed it. So we should be able to work it kind of into this conversation, right? I think it's very relevant. Yeah.
So before we get started on this first segment, somebody in the Discord mentioned Shatner. We were talking about dad jokes a lot today, and I saw a great meme where somebody recolorized the uniforms and said that the Blue Origin passengers were worried about the new uniforms, and they had recolored everyone's uniform except for Shatner's to red.
He's like, is he like 90 something years old?
He's up there.
Yeah.
I was surprised when I heard the announcement, because it's I'm sure you have to be in certain shape to be able to handle those kinds of G's on the way up.
90 years old. And wow. He did a rendition of Rocket Man? Didn't he do it? He did. He did a rendition of Rocket Man. We got to get that during the break. It's he could
do another one today.
Right? When very relevant. Yeah, it's happening today, right?
When did it? Yeah. I don't know precisely when they're lifting off, but exciting stuff. I didn't realize that they had another one planned so soon after the first one.
Craziness. Anyway, what are we talking about?
We are talking about press releases today.
Yay.
And to put us in the right context and mood for it, I got a clip ready. I think Johnny and Gus have ready to go here.
So McAfee allows you to accelerate digital transformation by leveraging the agility and innovation velocity offered by cloud-native applications hosted across private, public, and hybrid clouds.
Oh,
Adrian! That made Adrian actually physically hurt. He's like in physical pain right now.
Every single word, and it broke me.
You lost me at McAfee.
Right.
It's too bad Tyler isn't here today. But yeah, it's we read a lot of press releases here, and it's sometimes they're fine, but oftentimes, third, fourth time reading it, we can't make heads or tails of what they're announcing, and if it's not that, it's something frivolous. It's we hired a new VP of sales or something like that.
I thought you did a good job of categorizing them, Adrian, and I think you really did capture the what's wrong, right?
Yeah. So, again, I've unfortunately had to write some of these, and I've done my best, and I've been in the position where I tried to push back on some of these issues, and really did my best not to fall into any of these traps. But basically, I've put together a few categories here. The first of which is frivolous press releases. So I mentioned we hired a new VP of sales. You see that all the time. I
tend to skip over those for the show, but there are a certain number every week where they are announcing personnel changes, additions, removals, replacements, sometimes even promotions, right? And very, very rarely is it something that is relevant. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you should release a press release for a personnel change, but oftentimes you shouldn't. And I feel like that's the one that suffers from, we need to put out a press release just because, and that's not why. I remember having conversations, because I've written press releases as well, which I think is good. I think it gives us a little more clout to do this segment, right? The fact we've both written press releases for vendors while working for a vendor. And I think that we oftentimes did have this conversation where, should we do a press release for this, right? And sometimes the answer was no, because it doesn't deserve a press release, right? You'd lay out your kind of marketing plan, like, what are we going to do to promote, if you're working for a product vendor, whatever you're doing, whether it's a new feature, whether it's a new release update, whether it's a personnel change, whether
we now
it's
have
a partnership.
Dark mode.
What's that? Yeah, we now have dark mode. So let's do a press release because we have dark mode, right? And so we would be very specific about, okay, this kind of class of announcement should have a press release. But this class, we mention in our podcast, and we put out a blog post, and we do maybe a YouTube video, or maybe some combination depending on the significance of the feature and or announcement.
Yeah, I mean, like if Chris Krebs joined a vendor, we'd probably talk about it. That would probably be in our news.
When Matt Alderman joined as CEO for Security Weekly, we did a press release, and that was on purpose to show that we were had a leadership team now, right? Like we had a CEO other than Paul, who was like the sole founder and CEO. That was important. We felt to announce out to the community and to also garner interest, from potential sponsors. And that's quite frankly why we did that, right? But we wouldn't put out a press release just for every little thing. And I think frivolous is the right word for it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think once you have full-time marketing folks, one of the things that they'll do is they want a constant stream of content to put out there. That's
right.
One of the things that helps SEO, helps keep the name of your company on people's minds. And I guess technically, like I get that, but at the same time, if you put out too many frivolous ones, the chances of somebody reading one that's important, it's almost like crying wolf, like somebody's not likely to read it if you're constantly putting them out.
And I think they probably do it when I think about a marketing strategy is it's a pretty low cost way to get your brand out there. Because press releases can be free. You can also pay for services that will help promote and publish your press release. And if I remember correctly, you can pay a little or you can pay a lot. Like there's kind of a scale as to like how you want to send out your press release.
Yeah, if you want to include media, images, embeds, stuff like that, I think it costs more. I think the standard press release, you get a certain number of words.
Correct. With
the standard one. And it's, usually you buy it in like a batch. You buy like 10 press releases or something like that, at 500 words or whatever it is.
And also the distribution on them as well, how many places are going to be, redistributed.
Yeah. And a lot of news stories are little more than somebody just kind of restating a press release. So a lot of websites will pick those up. And same thing. They're looking for volume for quantity over quality. So you put out a press release with Business Wire or there's a bunch of different companies with various names that do that. And it's just full automation. You just see it everywhere the next day.
Yeah, and for the ones that aren't frivolous, it is helpful to see that, the ones that are using it appropriately, because I don't always necessarily go to like every security vendor's blog and check to see like what they're posting, because they could have an announcement in there. And if they decided not to send out a press release, you're relying that people maybe visited your blog and your social media and saw that kind of announcement. So it's definitely a balancing act.
Yeah. So, one of the other, let's jump to one of the other types here. So I think the one that gets commented on most on this show are the ones that are just unintelligible. You can't figure out what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
And sometimes we include them for that reason, just because either we can't figure it out because it's poorly written, or we can't figure it out because they have just stuck every possible buzzword and adjective in every corner of that press release.
Yeah, I think your number 2 and your number 4 are definitely related, but are definitely two different things. It has to be well written in that it has to like any written piece has to capture someone's attention, tell them something that they care about in a way that they can understand. And I think the unintelligible comes from, you read the opening statement, that's where people are going to start, and you can't figure out what they're trying to say. I mean, typically the opening statement is something about the company, right? It's XYZ vendor, comma, what they do in half a sentence has announced this particular feature, right? Or this, whatever the announcement is. Oftentimes if that's unintelligible, like you're in for not a good time reading the rest of it.
And you can kind of tell. You can tell, when they're trying to cram like the company byline, or like they've got an elevator pitch or something like that. You can tell when they're just trying to cram that in there. And I think part of this is what I call written by committee. Where the product manager, the CEO, like everybody's reading over this press release and trying to cram in what's important to them, right?
But I think that sound advice, Adrian, is assign this task to one person, or make at least one person responsible for collecting stuff from maybe those particular groups and then writing the press release. I think when it is written by committee, we end up with on it because you oftentimes the founder and or CEO will have a quote in there. The product marketing is typically the ones responsible for crafting the press release, but then you've got product management that may also want to look at it, and then you may have another group entirely dedicated to public relations or PR that may also be in the mix. And I think when all four of those kind of groups are like hands-on, like all trying to write at the same time or write their pieces, you get something that just makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, and I think there's a press release is big enough that there's a place for some of that stuff. Like if the CEO really wants to put something in there, give them a quote in the press release. And they can say whatever the hell they want. There
have been some really bad quotes, but also some really good quotes from executives at security vendors specifically. Some quotes I'm like, I really like that quote. That was a very intelligent statement, and it made me think differently about something.
Yeah, and I've got some good and bad examples here. So want to see how these hit you, Paul. So Arendeer is the developer of a neural tapping technology based on mobile devices that allows for a next-generation AI-powered authentication, identification, encryption, and bot segregation platform.
Yeah, that's when I have no idea what you just said. Like, I have no idea.
I don't either.
A lot of buzz. I mean, that hits on unintelligible, excessive hyperbole. It's a good one.
I mean, it borders on being offensive, because it's almost like, we're just going to throw out neural tapping technology with no context and make you feel dumb.
But now I looked up the definition of hyperbole, and it's accurate up to a point, like exaggerated statements or claims not meant to be taken literally. But I think it's the intent of the author for that to be taken literally. However, they definitely are exaggerated statements, perhaps. Or perhaps that exaggerated statement might be different from just the unintelligible alphabet soup. So I think we've kind of, in my mind now, unintelligible alphabet soup is one thing, and hyperbole or exaggerated statements are yet a different thing. And I'll give you an example of that. The world's only provider of XYZ feature. That's an exaggerated statement because likely they're very rarely, if ever, the only one to have that particular feature and or solution. I mean, sometimes they might have a patent on it, but there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, right?
Yeah, like you've got, I actually have some terms that I've pulled out of press releases here. Ultra smart, extremely effective, infinitely scalable.
Yes.
Nano weight agent.
100% detection rate is hyperbole, right?
True machine learning.
Yeah, as opposed to fake machine learning.
Yeah, suggesting everybody else is just screwing around. Usher in a new paradigm, and like there's innovation in almost every press release. They talk about innovation to the point where, people don't know what innovation looks like anymore, or what it actually is. Revolutionize the industry. I can't tell you how many press releases I've read that talk about revolutionizing something that haven't.
Yeah. I mean, if you're stating that in a press release, you likely haven't done that.
Yeah. So like every time you do something, you're saying you're doing something that should be a rare event, it becomes difficult to separate the stuff and I guess that's why we're around, right?
No, it's true. But also, having authored press releases, you have to think about your audience, and your audience isn't always technical, and your audience also isn't just higher level managers or not as not to say managers aren't technical, right? But there's a scale of audience. Some are executives and managers that are expecting a different way that a press release should be written to convey to them. Other folks are more technical in varying levels of technical prowess, and they want more of those technical details, right? So it was always a hard balance for me when I would write a press release typically the feedback from the team was, I'm either, too high level or too technical, right? It's tough to have that middle ground kind of balance where you can send a message in a short period of time that people can understand it without being super technical, but also appeal to those technical folks, which typically you would do later on in the press release, right? Is kind of the way I would structure it. John Strand also talked about structuring it in that way as well. Have your higher level messaging up front, talk about what you're releasing, what it does, the problem you solve, how you solve it in a nice high level, concise way. Then for the technical folks, go either link to a blog post or something, or right in the press release, maybe a screenshot and some more technical details to go, yes, in this product, we implemented this feature in this very specific way to solve this problem.
In fact, I've got another example that's a good example of that, of getting the context and everything you really want to get across in that very first paragraph of the press release. And this one is it was a press release about Coalfire picking up Denim Group. Coalfire today announced the acquisition of Denim Group, a recognized leader, not the only leader,
right.
A recognized
leader. Yep, well put.
Leader in application security to advance Coalfire's commitment to bring simplicity and scale to AppSec risk programs through automation. With the acquisition, Coalfire will transform modern application development in a way that optimizes scarce DevSecOps resources and accelerates time to market. Terms of the deal were not disclosed. And
well done.
I love that. I love terms of the deal were not disclosed, because some people are looking at that press release for one reason.
Right.
They want to know what the deal size was or what the terms were.
Yeah, no, I like that one. Well, because they hit on problems. Scarce resources in DevSecOps is a established challenge that we have.
Yeah, and if I didn't know what Denim Group did, that paragraph answers that. The deal rationale is in there, the reason that they acquired them, and what they're planning on doing with them in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So just killed a lot of birds right in that first paragraph, and then in the other paragraphs you can go deeper into different things. And but you raised a good point. Why are you writing the press release in the first place? I've seen companies write press releases just to get the attention of a single investor that they're courting. Mm-hmm. So that press release isn't written for everyone. It's written for a very specific group.
Correct.
To get their attention, to impress them, to maybe grease the wheels of this funding round that they're hoping to raise.
Yep.
So consider the goal of the press release, the audience. I made a list here of things you should consider or do when writing a press release. Get the important stuff out of the way first. That last example is a good example of that. Short, clear sentences. Mm-hmm. Sometimes these, I've got one example here that has. Where was that?
Yeah, you end up with run-on sentences in there.
Yeah. Here's one.
It's very easy. Press releases are an interesting place that just breeds run-on sentences because you're trying to convey so much. And I don't know, it happens that way in a press release, I find.
Yeah, it almost reads like contracts. Like legal language is the worst at, you can fill an entire page with one sentence because it's a huge list of all the things that apply to that legal statement. And here's a good example. The Mesh 7 solution empowers development, security, and operations leaders to address observability, security, and compliance for cloud-native, API-based, and other distributed applications.
It's a lot to take on in a single sentence.
There were 3 lists of 3 things a piece in that statement. And it's just too much.
I would pick the most important pairings in there.
I've noticed that that's something that people do when they can't decide on what term is the most important. Yeah. Or they want to convince you that that they're not just focused on one thing, that they're focused on something more broad. That they end up with these lists, and it's almost always 3 things.
Yeah. Well, because it creates more words to break those things out.
Yeah.
Because they would say, for developers, we implemented this feature because of XYZ, but for SOC analysts, we implemented this feature for XYZ. So it tends to get longer. And if you're paying per word or constrained in a press release, you want to cram all that into, a run-on sentence like you described.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's see. Short, clear sentences, short, clear title. I've seen some ridiculous titles, like 50 to 70 word titles, that try and cram, again, like a list of things in there. Kill the embellishment, and then because it destroys readability. And then, in press releases these days, they don't have to just be text. You can, like you said before, you can include screenshots. Mm-hmm. You can link to stuff outside the press release with more information.
Videos.
I mean, it's fairly common these days to see somebody come out with a press release, but also have a blog post, or more than one blog post even.
We would do that at Tenable for larger announcements. We'd have a press release, but to back up that press release, we would record a podcast episode, we would do a blog post, and we would do sometimes a video. I would actually do a video to show the feature. Like if you're announcing a new feature, which I haven't seen this in some time, maybe you have your own podcast or you're doing a podcast with us or whatever, talk about that in that podcast, but also have a video, a demonstration of it to actually show like a screenshot movie of this feature in action. And that doesn't always necessarily translate, obviously, to every press release, even every product feature. But for the ones that do, that's super helpful to folks like us and folks, defending enterprises today. Like, what does this actually do? And new customers can see that it's a feature that solves this problem. But also, I liked it for existing customers for customer retention. You may have the product and you're seeing this press release and you're like, oh, cool. Like the thing I own now does this. Like, where is that in the interface and what version is it in and how does that work? And you don't want to have to like dig through documentation or create a support ticket. But if they could see a video of like, you go here and then you go here, and in this version, this is the functionality you get, it increased adoption.
Yeah. And it's almost like a whole media kit to go along with it. Right. It's like, when somebody releases a music album or something like that, like that used to be the case. Like they'd announce a tour, there'd be like, music videos that would come out with it. It would be a whole event. Right.
Right.
So another thing that I'm not sure if this probably falls under the hyperbole section, and there's probably a better term for that. Hyperbole probably wasn't the best term. But another one that irks me is when the press release, especially in the title, promises something, and you read the press release and it's not there. It's not in the press release. Like they never get to it. They never explain what it is. Like it kind of teases it in the title and completely lets you down when you read it. I don't know if you've read any like this.
XYZ vendor announces XYZ feature to combat ransomware. And then you read it and you're like, wait, how does that help me? How does that help me with ransomware?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And my example is that I dropped it in the Discord. Herasoft, the premier ransomware-proof solution for enterprises, raises $5 million in its Series A investment round to combat trillions in yearly cybercrime damages. Just in the title, like that's hit me with so many things. Like, first of all, you're raising your Series A. It's a tiny Series A. These days, $5 million is a tiny Series A. So you can't be the premier anything, because you're brand new. You don't have any customers probably at this point. Or if you do, very early customers. I can't figure out what they do when I read that press release. And they're quoting this ridiculous, I'm trying to remember the name of I think it's Cybersecurity Ventures is the name of the company that made up this trillions in cybercrime that were, these damages we somehow have. And it's entirely made up, completely made up. And they go on, I think, in the press release to talk about how ransomware attacks are estimated to cost the world $20 billion. But then they say like global damages are going to reach 10.5 trillion by 2025. So you're telling me that ransomware is just a tiny drop in the bucket, that there's something way bigger than ransomware?
Yeah,
I don't think
it's
so.
true. It also reminds me of surveys as well, where the company will conduct a survey or work with a third party to conduct a survey and then put out a press release and try and summarize what was in the survey. And then you read the press release and then you go read the survey results and you're like, I don't come to the same conclusions oftentimes that the vendors have come to, right? Because there's just, in the methodology and the number of people that they surveyed, the questions they asked, the biases that may or may not have been formed during that survey, I don't think I always come to the, I definitely don't always come to the same conclusions as the vendor based on the survey. And sometimes you'll see that, in a press release as well, because they're doing a press release to promote the survey. And sometimes that's done really, really well. And oftentimes it's done very, very poorly. Like there's just way too many holes in the story.
Yeah, and then the other pet peeve they hit is their solution is ransomware proof.
Yeah.
Any unhackable ransomware proof, like silver bullet type statement, and I know it's not just me. From talking to a lot of people, I know it rubs a lot of people the wrong way. Like it's an easy way to immediately lose a huge chunk of your audience.
Yeah.
Because objectively, it's an untrue statement.
Your zero trust next generation single pane of glass.
And when you dig into it, this tiny thing in this tiny corner that they're doing, maybe you can make an argument that, it's not going to be susceptible to ransomware, which means people are just going to go around it. Like it doesn't protect the business. It just protects itself in this tiny use case, in this tiny corner of all the stuff that your business does. And completely ignores the fact that, criminals will just, hack the thing next to it, right? It's like, all right. The other, so some of this falls under the category of bending the truth, which is another category that I've got here. And it comes in different forms, like I think one you pointed out earlier is when somebody is the leading endpoint security vendor based in northern Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. Is that how they're getting away with that? Like in northern Wisconsin, they're the leading endpoint security vendor.
All the time you see these ridiculous qualifiers, and it's almost, like designed to be a joke, like how many qualifiers they have to put on the end of that statement to make it true.
Yeah. Yeah, I would, my advice would be to use something that is very measurable and actionable. And you can't even really say awards either, because anyone can buy an award, as I've learned even recently. And I dig into awards, and I was like, oh, no, like you can just totally go buy an award. I mean, there are legitimate awards that you can win, right? But there's also a lot of them that are, I don't want to say not legitimate, right? But they're not a measurable kind of thing.
They're not. I've got a few for a company that doesn't exist.
Right.
So I have proof of that. I made up a fake company for people who don't know, and I in that fake company with fake employees won real awards. Yeah. But won them. We pulled out the credit card and paid for them.
Right.
For some of them, you even get to make up the title of the award. So I mean, the award's essentially like another press release. Yeah. Like you can just write whatever you want. You're just paying to say whatever you want. It doesn't have to be true. The first cloud security solution ever that both integrates with Linode and defaults to dark mode. Yeah. I made that one up.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. So be mindful when you're writing these and when you're reading them, right, of all these things that we discussed, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the other hand, like I'm making fun of this dark mode thing. When Slack finally put dark mode into their app, that was absolutely a press release moment. Like, there are all these acts, like people have been asking for it forever. So it was a pretty big deal when they included dark mode. But for your average, network detection response or EDR vendor, no. Agreed. And then the last category is FUD. Is the stuff that's we don't see as much FUD as we used to. But I've got an example here, and this is copy and paste straight out of it. If you've ever watched a show like 24, then you know that a terrorist attack done by way of hacking into a public utility systems is one of the scariest threats to public safety. Imagine someone getting control over a power plant or many power plants and shutting down a whole region's power supply. Now imagine it happening to an entire country or continent.
Like they totally
That's straight out of a press release.
I mean, they could have used a real world event and not from a TV show in that example specifically. But they could have talked about Russia's attack on Ukraine.
Right.
Instead of a TV show, a fictional TV show, right?
Yeah, you use an example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for people that understand how those power grids work, like the amount of hacking you'd have to do to take down a continent, or even an entire country. And then they go on to talk about water supply. Like here in the U.S., you would have to hack like 100,000 different organizations, to do anything to the water supply in the entire country.
I don't know. I kind of like that story that came across our desks this morning, where the high school student took over an entire district worth of TVs and projectors and rickrolled everyone. We'll talk about that more maybe later, or maybe tomorrow night as well. I'm sure it'll come up. It was pretty amazing. Still not at the scale that you're talking about, though.
Right. All right, what else here?
All right, one more thing. We got to wrap it up.
Yeah. So, I think in some of these cases, like, life gives you lemons. And the example I've got here is the Norton LifeLock Avast merger. Like, you're going to be in a position where if you're writing that press release, you have to make it sound like a win, even when it's
not. Yep, a lot of times,
tail between your legs kind of situation. Like consumer AV is desperately clinging to relevance, but you still have to write it as if it's some kind of amazing event.
Yep.
All right. That's all I've got here. So stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few moments to talk application security scanning with Surag Patel from Contrast Security.
Cybersecurity is about more than just technology. It's about how people behave with emails, data, and cloud applications that directly impacts your company's security posture. Security works best when it's ingrained in the culture of your organization. To learn how to build a security culture and transform your employees from targets into a strong line of defense, head to securityweekly.com/proofpoint and visit their Cybersecurity Awareness Center. The hybrid workforce is here to stay, and it requires real-time visibility, control, and rapid response of every endpoint, whether it's in the office or home. Tanium offers an endpoint management and security platform built for the most demanding IT environments. Many of the world's largest and most sophisticated organizations, including nearly half of the Fortune 100, rely on Tanium to deliver unmatched endpoint visibility and control. Whether you're preparing for zero trust or protecting your network from supply chain risk, Tanium empowers technology leaders to achieve greater agility, efficiency, and confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tanium.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join us in our next live webcast on October 21st to learn why zero-knowledge encryption matters. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to save your seat. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, and this interview is sponsored by Contrast Security. Surag Patel joins us today to talk about why less is more for static application scanning. Surag brings more than a decade of experience to Contrast Security, where he serves as the Chief Security Officer. Welcome to the show, Surag.
Hey, thanks, Adrian. Excited to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. Yeah, so definitely an area that's I think constantly changing and very quickly evolving. This particular area of AppSec, where we talk about how to especially in DevOps, how to get tools integrated into the workflows and into the CI/CD pipelines.
Yeah, it's a hot topic. Always a conversation point around, hey, shifting left. We use that way too commonly. We enable code analysis earlier and earlier in the process, and so an area of focus for us. But at Contrast, we've kind of always focused on how do we do it in a way that's native for the way software is built today, not how it was written 10 or 15 years ago.
Right. So it seems like a good place to start. What has changed with the tooling, and why is it why is it that we need newer tooling built and designed for how folks are doing things today to integrate into these pipelines?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, there's so many different analogies I can give in our real world lives, but as technology modernizes, you need new tooling. It's as simple as that, for many reasons. In the world of software, writing software, testing software, validating software, today's software is very different than it was a decade ago from several different dimensions. One is the architecture of the software is different, right? API heavy architectures, microservices, nano services, as some of our customers call them. There's different ways you write the software, and therefore the analysis you do is distinctly different. I don't have monoliths as I used to, where I can just run through tens of thousands of lines of code and have the full context of everything it's doing right there in one place, right? That's very different than how it used to be. So that's the architecture. The other element is simply the speed, right? The rate at which we're writing software today and the amount we're writing it and the amount of testing we're doing, the pipelines, the frequency of that entire cycle, again, necessitates it to be simply different. And so that you can run it in a way that doesn't slow you down. I've got to ship more software quickly, and that's paramount to my business, to my top line. And I'd say those are the two. And then the third is probably, a little bit tied back to actually a bit of a conversation from the previous segment, but, simply there's not enough expertise these days, right? The number of people who are security experts is not sufficient. Trying to train more people is possible, but a different way to solve the problem. And so we simply need tools to be better. We don't have the time and the energy and the luxury of having a bunch of security expert software developers out in the market. We can constantly train them, and we should, of course. But we also need the technology to simply be better.
Yeah, so it's a good lead in into how we do that with tooling. I guess you can have people sit through classes and things like that, send them off to conferences, get certifications and things like that. But again, you talked about the need for speed, and I think a lot of people have found out the hard way that if you step in front of the DevOps train, you just get run over. it's not going to stop for you.
Yeah.
So, and that seems like another good opportunity here, especially when you're integrating with IDEs and with the pipeline, to do training, kind of just in time as you go.
Yeah, and to your point, there's numerous ways to do it, right? And there's not one solution that I'm going to say is the magical silver bullet, but there's training in the traditional senses. Get folks in a classroom, train them in their educational process, give them coursework, give them examples, let them learn that way. That's one that works. There's another way that I went to the undergraduate school I went to had a motto that said "Learn by doing." That was our school or my university's motto, and in that world is another way that you can train kind of just in time as folks are doing what they do. So just imagine, when you get to a world where some of the tooling is built natively for today, the way software is written today, you can, and it's possible, technology is possible these days, to find an issue and shift it back right then and there to the developer to say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Developer, here's an issue. Here's a line of code. Here's why it's a problem. Hey, if you don't know what this vulnerability is, let us link you to a OWASP web page that explains to you this kind of vulnerability and why it happens. Here's a line of code. Here's how you would fix it. Right then and there, literally in their IDE or through a Slack alert or through a Jira ticket. And then you get this kind of a different type of training, I should say. I'm not going to say better or worse, but you get kind of what we've called our customers, or actually what our customers have called to us, micro training, right? You get results right then and there. And when a developer kind of goes through that a couple times, guess what? They stop making that mistake slowly because they've just realized, hey, they find the patterns. That's what they're good at generally. They find the patterns and they're given instruction and guidance on, hey, this is an issue. Here's why it's an issue. Here's how you would write better code.
And I think for that to be successful, what you're sending back to the developer has to be an issue. And I think some of the problems we've had with static code analysis is it tells us that this might be an issue. And I've learned and experienced as a developer myself, I don't want to know about the things that might be an issue because that's just more work for me and I got to get this release out. Like, only tell me about the things that are an issue. And oftentimes, static code analysis is not the way to do that. You're going to go find that bug and exploit it once the app has stood up, and then it's a real issue.
Amen. 100% agree. And I think that's exactly part of the issue of how something like static analysis has been, we're trying to stick a square peg in a round hole in many cases, right? I don't, A, give me stuff that's only accurate. Don't give me stuff that's a false positive or not truly an issue. And B, don't give me the nice to haves, frankly. I don't have time for the nice to haves. I'm not sure many developers who do. Give me the most critical stuff that's going to put me on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow. That's the stuff I really care about, and it better be accurate.
Yeah,
period.
Because I think, it's interesting. I've looked at some of the open source vulnerabilities in depth with some of the researchers from Qualys, right, as an example. And the way that they analyze the code and put those together, I'm like, they don't even use static analysis tools. I'm like, I don't think static analysis, they're not going to find those issues, right? Now, if you've got a clear case where, like, this statement, the way you wrote it is in fact SQL injection, right? That's one thing. But if you look at the trends in analyzing open source software, as an example, the bugs that they're finding today are very esoteric and often require multiple steps that I think it's hard pressed to find those in static code. You might find indications that could lead to that, but that's not, we already established that's not what's helpful, right?
I absolutely agree. And actually the origin of Contrast and part of our first products to market are exactly built on that premise, right? Is the best way to find things accurately, continuously, and constantly throughout your development process is by seeing it running. Now, you don't actually have to wait till it's in production. You see it running because you test all day long. You don't have to do security tests, but just functional tests, smoke tests, unit tests, integration tests. All of those are running software, right? And so, the original Contrast product, Contrast, what we call Contrast Assess, is built with that notion and actually defined a brand new category that even kind of Gartner and the industry has recognized now as a interactive approach to application security testing, right? And that's built exactly for that reason, right? Those things are esoteric. You don't find these things in static code. And if you do, you have to make a lot of assumptions. And guess what? Assumptions generally means inaccuracy.
For sure.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, this kind of just-in-time approach. Your company's name is Contrast Security, but it could almost be context security. Because it's so important to, like, there's so many trainings I've been through that tell you, be wary of this, don't do that, and all that goes out the window, 2 months later when you need it. It means so much more, to get hit with that lesson at the moment you're making the mistake. Almost like having somebody mentoring you as you're going through and making mistakes.
Absolutely right. And, just a quick sidebar, because you mentioned the Contrast name and context, the name actually came from, you may recall the notion of contrast in MRIs and medical imaging. They inject this little dye in your body, and all of a sudden when they do a scan, it glows with way more accuracy and context than you would get if you just did a scan effectively, right? That's actually where the name Contrast comes from. But to your point on the context, why do we look for vulnerabilities? Why do tools exist to find vulnerabilities? It's quite simple. We want to fix them. We want customers and the industry to ship secure software. Finding stuff doesn't matter if you're not fixing it, frankly. And so the idea of giving the accurate findings in context is to drive the outcome we all want, which is fix the problem. Mean time to remediation is really the kind of key metric here. And so that's generally what our customers are looking at and kind of aiming for is, hey, we want to take mean time to remediation. There's plenty of reports out there from every vendor you can imagine that say, on average, a critical highs and critical vulnerabilities will take something like, it takes about 6 months to fix half of what is found. That's unacceptable, simply, in today's world. And so that's a metric our customers always drive towards, like, how do I get, instead of taking 6 months to solve half of what I find, how can I solve half, or ideally all of what I find within a couple days or a week for that matter? Because then you're getting it in context, you're fixing it right away, and then you get that efficiency that you're looking for.
Yeah. So, going back to the title of the segment, why less is more, I know from my experiences in security, we tend to, worry about, not having a tool or not having visibility in every step of the process and every place. We tend to want to hoard every log, and keep a bit of everything. And so why is that mentality not work here? And what's the, what are you going after with the less is more here?
It's not just a Unix dad joke.
Less is more. Oh man, thank you, Paul. Mm-hmm. That did not even occur to me.
Yeah, it's Paul is actually back to Paul's comment just a little while ago, right? Developers don't want a 300-page PDF of which 200, and this is a real stat from a real commercial tool that's used very widely. A customer of ours sent us a report they got from an application, 300 pages of PDF of findings. Okay, we put our security researchers on that 300-page report, which they did not want to read, but they did. And they said, and the reality of the 300-page report was 6 were worthwhile.
Yeah,
We're either not a false positive or things that they really have to worry about. And so
that's not a good ratio.
Thought about not a good ratio at all. And now you know why static analysis tools have a bad rap, because we're trying to stick this square peg in a round hole, frankly. And so when we thought, there was like, look, our goal is to find 6, and that's it. We don't want to find 10 of which only 6 are accurate, or find 300 of which 6 are accurate. We need to find the stuff that matters, and that's really it. Don't give me the notes and the lows, and all that stuff can be found later by some auditor somewhere. Give me the stuff that matters and give it to me accurately. And that's really, really critical. So that's also kind of been our motto as we design products.
I also think in that example, Surag, that it's awesome for a developer or a systems administrator, right? When you get the report and maybe you have those 300 findings, but it's broken down to be like, all right, if you fix this one thing, it wipes out 127, right, of those findings. And so now in the static analysis, I can go to my code and be like, and I did this like when I was converting from Python 2 to 3. Like, there's this, the way you did it in 2.7 was this way, but in 3 it's this way. So go find all those points in your code, and now I wipe out, 47 issues that make my code compatible with Python 3. And I just, search and replace, go through and change those things. Those are the kinds of things developers I think appreciate and are looking for.
So that raises a good point. How much of that 300-page report is due to the way it was reported being inefficient, and not summarizing things effectively, and how much of it is just poor testing?
It's a little bit of both, frankly. Well, some of it is the tools were probably built for software that was built in monolithic days, right? Not built for teams that are applications now that use APIs to communicate with other services or work in smaller contextual elements. So there's that, I think, is a key piece of it. But the other piece is, like, to your point, the reporting and frankly, the limitations of only having a static context. If I only have static context, I can't really understand very well what is real and what is not, right? And that's, again, for us, as we think about it, there is not a single tool that will solve every problem, but having kind of a set of capabilities across the spectrum that's used by developers then and there in the IDE or in their pull request process is distinct from what you can do during the pipeline, right? When it's in the CI/CD, I have a lot more context. The application's running. I can get much more accurate context across different services. And so kind of merging together those various capabilities is really where it all starts coming together.
Yeah, and I think a great example of that too, to help developers out, because you're not going to be able to fix everything all at once. You're going to have to prioritize even those 6 findings. And when it comes to like software composition analysis, my bone to pick with that is, like, it'll just tell you that you've got a vulnerable library. And I'm like, that's great. Okay, so now I spent the, half hour to an hour and I researched that and I'm like, okay, yes, it's a vulnerable module that I've included, but I'm not accessing the vulnerable method within that module. So like now you just wasted a half an hour of my time that I could have been spending fixing something that actually matters, filing the Jira ticket that, like, later on we should always upgrade that library. That should be part of your process. But if you don't need to do that right now, go fix something that matters now, or go work on the next feature and then fix that in the next release, because the risk level is low. But it's not properly conveying that risk is what I often find in those tools that get developers really angry.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, to bring that to life again, and this is, to come back to, like, there's static scanning capabilities, but there's interactive abilities, and there's even protection, right? So, like,
yes.
To take your example, Paul, to bring it to life, is for us, with static analysis, and it doesn't matter who does the static analysis, right? Whether it's Contrast or some other vendor, static is static. So to do static analysis of code and find your libraries is actually technically an extremely simple problem. I just look for the library, I match it up to a publicly available database, and I tell you if there's a vulnerability. That's right. Actually very simple, right? But for us, like in the pipeline, when you're running that application, our interactive approach and what we call kind of the interactive SCA can actually tell us with much greater accuracy, hey, I know you have this library and there's a vulnerability. That's easy. But let me tell you if you're using any of the classes within that library, of which, guess what? 80% of the time, the answer is actually no. I'm not even using it. And so we add that context, but to get that context, you need to see the application running. Otherwise, you can't get that with static analysis. And so that's where, having static early on the process, having the interactive piece in the middle is great. And then for us, the last piece of our kind of broader platform is there's also protections, right? We can weave in a protection when you run a workload in production. And so we can even tell you, hey, this is actually protected in production. So you still probably should fix it, maybe when you get the time, when the priority is right. But you can rest assured that if someone's trying to attack your struts 2 vulnerability, it's going to get protected in production, right? And that's for us the last element of the, my non-technical analogy, like the airbag, right? You can be as proactive as you want, wear seatbelts and leave the home safely, but you still generally want that airbag for the unexpected or the new. things that you didn't anticipate to happen, or the things you didn't have time to fix, frankly.
Surag, can you provide telemetry on privileges as well? In other words, like I've got a vulnerable library. Maybe I am calling a vulnerable method, but I'm only calling that in the part of the application that requires the highest level of admin privileges, not unauthenticated. I believe you could probably give us some of that context as well.
The data is there, but the product doesn't do it today.
Okay.
It's a great. I'm writing that feature down to share with our team. We have the context to do it, frankly, because we can tell how the application is behaving to just give you a sense of the power. But it's not. We don't actually report on that today. We wouldn't tell you that this is happening in a privileged area of the application or not.
Right. But you tell me what area of the application it is operating in. As a developer, you probably pretty quickly go, well, that's only for people who are logged in with this privilege level, so therefore I'm setting the priority accordingly.
Yeah, we actually, it's interesting. It just happened to us 2 weeks ago. We often have customers who come back to us and say, hey, this finding that you found for me in my interactive piece of my analysis is a false positive. And we help them look at it, and we can say, no, it's actually not. Guess what, Mr. Customer? What you just found is a vulnerability in an open source library that is not even yet disclosed. The world doesn't know about it yet, because our code doesn't care if it's custom code or open source code.
That's awesome.
If we see a vulnerability in the code path, whether it's your code or not, we will report on it. If it's in a public library and it's a publicly published CVE, we'll obviously tell you. But in many cases, our customers are finding CVEs that the world doesn't even know about yet. Frankly.
Yeah, that's not surprising, actually, when you look at how much code is out there, right? And how much code hasn't been scrutinized at that level. That's really cool.
Exactly right.
New feature request coming up, a button to open a CVE for this finding.
Right.
Hey, that is a work in progress, Adrian. It is my, it's funny, and going into our roadmap a little bit, but I've been telling our team for a while, I want to build this like, in Gmail, they have the click here if it's not spam button, like this little button. Or if it is spam, you click the button and it'll send it off to some, smart people in a back room who will validate it manually. And so my goal is to have that kind of button where customers can say, hey, I don't know about this result. Can you click it? And they'll send it to our experts. And they'll come back and say, yep, it's a vulnerability in an open source library. And guess what? We're going to publish the CVE, or we're going to start the responsible disclosure process for you on the CVE.
That's awesome.
And even let our customers report it. How cool would that be?
Yeah, that's more and more a trend we're seeing with security vendors, where there is some kind of team, that you can kind of punt something to that you're stuck on, that will kind of help you out of that rut, help you figure out what you're looking at.
Yeah, we come from a more traditional, like tech-heavy founding team, and for us, generally, anytime a human needs to be involved, we consider it we historically used to consider it a gap in the product. But frankly, I think that was an immature way to think about it, frankly, because things like this, you really do need the expert, right? We have in our we call our labs team a bunch of security researchers. These are folks who are like on Facebook's Hall of Fame and find CVEs all day long and weekends because that's what they enjoy doing. But you need folks like that to help you just validate things at times, right? And so we're starting to build up and have built up a pretty amazing set of security researchers. Now the name of the game is scaling that up, right?
Yeah, you certainly got to be careful with it. You open that up too much and, you can create a problem for yourself.
Yeah, we have no intention of being a services company at all. But if there's very specialty experience or knowledge that we can help with, we want to make sure we can bring that.
So for a company looking to implement something like this, where do they start? Certainly, I think in a perfect world, buy the product, hand it to the developers, they'll clean up the mess and they'll integrate it into their ongoing daily process. But in real life, maybe they never set up the tool, install the tool.
Yeah.
And then there's also like where do you start? Do you focus on getting developers integrating it into their daily workflow first? Or do you work on cleaning up the existing mess? Since you're coming in for the first time, those scans are going to be kind of heavy. The results coming back from that, I would imagine. Or is it a mix of both?
It's really a mix a little bit, and this is generally where one size doesn't fit all for every enterprise, right? Generally speaking, most of our customers will come in and start deploying a new process, a new model in their pipeline. So in their validation and testing phases, if I may. Now that's still very close to development, but it's not technically the developers. It's mostly maybe testing or in the pipeline, things like that. And the reason they do it there is you get the accuracy, you get the continuous feedback. It doesn't slow down development necessarily. And so that's a common place for most folks to start if they're thinking DevOps, DevSecOps. The more advanced ones say, hey, okay, this is great. I've got it webbed into my pipeline or connected into my pipeline to get constant context. But I want it to even happen a little bit earlier, as the developer is checking in some code, as they're doing their pull request even earlier in the process. And so that's actually a big reason why we just announced and extended this static scanning capabilities over the last month. We just announced our capabilities there in the approximately last few weeks. And it's mostly to extend into that portion of the development lifecycle, right? So when you're making a pull request, give me some of the most critical results accurately right then and there. So I don't have to wait for my pipeline to kind of continue and execute over the next several minutes. So we see that. And then finally, like I said, one size doesn't fit all, although most of our customers will start like in the pipeline and then shift left, or we call extend right. There's others that may start differently. For example, there's some who say, I kind of want to think of scanning as a process I just want to enable the developers to do. They've told me they want to do it, which would be surprising, but sometimes they do, early in the process. And so they empower them with this kind of static scanning capability. And there's others yet who say, hey, look, man, let's just start with open source. Okay, fine. Let's stick the open source SCA analysis in there. I always like to challenge that, frankly, because it is risky and you should look at it, absolutely right. But it's even riskier to not look at your custom code and only look at the open source. It's a pretty scary thought, frankly. And so, it really is a combination of all of the above, frankly.
Anything else that you want to cover, Surag, that we haven't covered so far? I know you've got a lot of research that's come out. Some good stuff that's attached actually to the show notes for the show today.
Yeah, I would say, look, take a look at the research that's out there. Enterprises all day long, large, medium, and small, are constantly looking for ways to deliver more secure software faster, efficiently. I think maybe to Paul's comment earlier, and I think my simple kind of comment would be, it's possible. Many folks come to us and say, I've tried this static analysis thing. It just kind of gets me in trouble with my development team. It's always a siloed security versus developer kind of culture here. And I would just kind of listen, but I would definitely let them know that it's possible to have a very amazing and strong relationship between security and development where you are mutually supporting each other. Security is not slowing development down. Development's actually writing better code, so that what's going out the door at the end of the process is making your company and your enterprise much more secure, right? So we have plenty of stats, Adrian, as you mentioned. There's reports galore based on real-time continuous data from tens of thousands of applications continuously across pretty much every vertical you can think of, where we show things like mean time to remediation. How are customers who build a strong development security relationship able to fix things faster? How are they able to kind of weave things in the way that they want? So check out some of the results. And then we will have upcoming here next week, actually, a new report focused on specifically serverless workloads. And so I know that's been a hot topic. Many folks keep asking us, hey, well, how does this apply to serverless or serverless functions? And so we just did a new research report on that we'll be happy to publish next week.
I definitely want to check that out because I've got some code that I want to port over to serverless, and I'm wondering, like, defensively, how do I need to adjust it so that it's not susceptible to vulnerabilities?
Yeah, and it's a scary thought. Like in the serverless world, although it's been active for some time now, there are really no purpose-built tools to help you write secure serverless functions. There's several that help you protect the running workload, right? The cloud protection platforms. But there's nothing that helps you actually write a secure serverless function today in market. So stay tuned next week.
Awesome.
Very nice. Surag, thanks so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Hey, likewise, this is great. Thank you both.
And make sure you visit securityweekly.com/contrast for more information. And we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.
Let's face it, cyber attackers have the advantage. ExtraHop is on a mission to help you take it back. Regain the upper hand with security that can't be undermined, outsmarted, or compromised. When you don't have to choose between protecting your business and moving it forward, that's security uncompromised. See how it works in the full product demo, free online at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. SOC analysts are often overworked and underappreciated. In fact, 78% say that working in the SOC is very painful. Yikes. On October 20th, Devo is establishing SOC Analyst Appreciation Day to pay some long overdue kudos to you and encourage organizations to improve SOC analyst job satisfaction and mental well-being. Join Devo as they celebrate SOC analysts around the world and provide opportunities for personal and professional development, all while you unwind with programming specifically designed to help you de-stress. You can also win a Nintendo Switch if you participate in Devo's Twitter hashtag contest. All you have to do is follow at Devo_Inc. on Twitter and tweet using hashtag SOC Analyst Day. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to sign up and learn more. Did you know that 81% of data breaches are caused by weak password security? Keeper Security's easy-to-use password manager platform keeps your passwords safe, easy to share, and out of reach of cybercriminals. Keeper is the leading cybersecurity platform for preventing password-related data breaches and cyber threats. Check out Keeper and get a free 3-year Keeper password manager solution when you take a demo of Keeper for Business. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Keeper Security.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Urjevec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on digital pass registration. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register now. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. Now for the news. You can go to securityweekly.com/ESW 246 to see the notes that we're looking at here that we put together for today's news. And as usual, I start out with, it's almost every week there's some kind of crazy funding round. You see Wiz there, Paul?
You define crazy. Is that like a
I don't know.
Technical measurement?
I don't know anymore. So back when I was at 451, that $250 million round that Tenable raised was crazy, like just unbelievable.
Was that the Excel? That was the Excel round, first Excel round. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the one right before they started prepping for IPO. Mm-hmm. And so this one is only a 250 million Series C, which is less than we saw Wiz's competition Orca. I think that the C extension was 550 million alone on top of another 205 million. So over 700 million raised in their Series C. But Orca's valuation was 1.8 billion, excuse me. And Wiz's valuation is 6 billion.
Yeah, that's what makes it I mean, in the Tenable example, from what I remember, we had not, when I was there, right, we had not taken on a huge amount of funding. So to take a larger Series C made sense at the time. I'm not sure how it matched up with I don't remember the valuation at the time. But I think where it gets crazy is when you're taking on so much funding, right, that it's way exceeding like your revenue or your value or your valuation is just like ridiculous. Like a 6 billion valuation that's high.
Yeah, and for context, that's almost what Intel, not factoring in inflation, almost what Intel paid for McAfee
right.
over 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost triple what Cisco paid for Duo.
Right. Correct.
Excuse me, I made the poor judgment of opening a soda. So I'm going to be burping into my arm occasionally. So only time will tell, if either Wiz or Orca see any kind of exit that validates these validations. Mm-hmm. It's just It's crazy. The way I was putting is, it's almost like Wiz saw Orca's $700 million raise and said, "Hold my 50-year scotch."
Mm-hmm. Craziness.
Gretel AI, another funding raise here. So this is in 2 weeks, we've seen 3 Series B raised for privacy engineering companies. And this is the third one and largest one. Last week we saw, let me see if I can remember off the top of my head. Nope, I can't. But we saw a $30 million round raised and a $35 million round raise. I'm blanking on the names, but they all do it a little bit differently. Like one of them last week looks at your data and generates fake data for you. And then the other one, I think, actually scrubs your data. And it's all about making sure that you're not, developers don't have the entire company database, customer database sitting on their laptop, which we've seen leaked and lost in all kinds of breaches over the years. So the idea is to give you a safe data set to play around with in dev and QA environments.
I think we'd be remiss not to mention that Gretel AI's co-founder and CEO is Ali Gulshan, who had a successful company and exit with StackRox.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
That plays in that I think oftentimes plays into the funding rounds too.
They were in the cloud container space, right?
Yeah,
StackRox.
Acquired by Red Hat.
Right. Next up, I don't know much about Kentic, but this is already their Series C. It's a smallish Series C, $40 million Series C, and they're a network observability startup. What's interesting about that, they don't seem like they're pure play security. They're more of like a network tool that has potentially security use cases. They just look for statistical anomalies in NetFlow, in network traffic. So like if it's normal for 1,000 users to be hitting a server on a Monday afternoon, and all of a sudden there's 3,000 or there's only 10 or something like that, like they'll let you know there's an anomaly going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I really like ExtraHop for that. They're more established in making that transition and pivot into security, and their interface is amazing. They're also a sponsor, but one of the reasons they're a sponsor is because they do amazing things. It sounds like this is kind of playing in that same space, but certainly a space that's super important, right? As our networks get more ubiquitous and complex, having software that helps you with some of those decisions is super helpful. It doesn't replace the human, of course, but that's oftentimes what we do as humans, right? I mean, I go into my Security Onion, my Kibana console, right? And I'm looking at that going, yeah, no, that's expected behavior. That's not expected behavior. And I'm just doing that in my head because I'm monitoring a small network also, right? As you scale out, this is crucial to be able to do. And I can see that being, a crossover between sometimes it's just good network health and what's expected and what's not for the network to operate, but also anomalies for security kind of get thrown in the mix. I mean, that's always been the case. I mean, I worked very closely with the network team at all my jobs, in my past. So,
and it looks like they're compatible with all the major clouds, containers, private networks, and apparently maybe have an agent. They mentioned that their solution can go on hosts to monitor network. So it's that's another thing I think that's important, depending on who the buyer is of this product, right? Like generally, I don't like the idea of having a separate cloud security product for the same thing that I have an on-prem security product for. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, if the DevOps team are the buyers of one product and security teams the buyers of another, maybe it makes sense. But it seems like they cover all the bases there in terms of where you might have network to monitor. ForcePoint picked up BitGlass, which BitGlass was one of the original CASBs. Also, along with everybody else, pivoted into SASE. They actually called it something else that seems like a partial CASB. They call it SSE, Security Service Edge.
Yeah, that's the terminology everyone's going to, right? Is that something to do with edge rather than a CASB?
I mean, it looks like the same collection of acronyms, CSPM, DLP, SWG, ZTNA, that you see with SASE. So I'm not sure. Maybe it's something where once you put BitGlass and ForcePoint together, they're a full SASE, but with them separately, they're not.
Right. Probably what led to acquisition, right?
Yeah. So ForcePoint got acquired by a PE shop a while back, so I can't imagine that this is great news for BitGlass investors. BitGlass, how much did they raise? Like 150 million, something like that. Yeah. Maybe they're breaking even. I don't know. They because it's private, they didn't share the deal amount.
And ForcePoint is already kind of a conglomeration of various companies, right? Their secure web gateway was what was it called? Web Scout? No, not Web Scout.
So they did acquire a CASB. So I'm trying to remember the name of the CASB, but Imperva acquired them first, and then they divested them and sold them off to ForcePoint. So ForcePoint used to be web. Help me out here. There's so many web ones. The one that used WebSense. Thank you.
Yes, they acquired WebSense. Yes, formerly WebSense. Raytheon.
No, they changed their name.
It was Raytheon WebSense. It's a whole Raytheon acquired 80%.
So Raytheon acquired WebSense, and they rebranded, and they combined it with some of the Raytheon cyber stuff that they already had, which included, I think, parts of Mantech International. And then they just rebranded as ForcePoint. And I just haven't heard much about them since then, except them getting picked up by a PE shop. So this is a PE shop putting together two, I would assume, slow growers and trying to turn it into a win. Maybe spinning it out for another acquisition exit, or I can't see it going IPO, but who knows? A new company, ChainGuard, aiming to address SBOM type supply chain threats, things like that, from the very beginning of development process all the way through the development process. Very early stage. Not a whole lot of details on how they're going to do it, but definitely an experienced team, and I think really, really interesting. They're poking in some of those dark corners where we're really nervous about. Okay, we're using 47 npm packages. How many of those are going to cause us pain at some point or get compromised? They're kind of shining lights in all those dark corners. Or planning to. I don't know if they even have product at this point.
Yeah, it sounds just like an SCA play, but they say
that's a piece of it.
Yeah, because they say applying zero trust principles to supply chain security to make the software lifecycle secure by default.
So they're also looking to make sure that malicious code isn't inserted by an insider, by an outsider. So there's they give a bunch of examples on the website of different threats that they're hoping to address at different stages of the development lifecycle. Yubico has been talking about doing biometric security keys for a while, and they finally released them. You can buy them now. So basically, it's the same same YubiKey that you're used to, except the gold disc that you would touch to send the authentication code is also now a fingerprint reader to make sure that not just anybody can, tap that and make it work.
That's a really nice feature.
Yeah, especially if you're, with something easy to lose like this.
Yes.
Easy to get stolen, certainly in like an evil maid attack or something like that.
Because inevitably you end up leaving some of those plugged in your computers and you just rely on your physical security for it.
Some of them are designed to be left plugged in, like the little YubiKey Nanos that stick out like a couple millimeters. Yeah, they're designed to be just kind of installed forever.
Yeah, I mean, it is a trade-off on security, right? But on my desktop, certainly, you probably leave one plugged in. And again, you're relying on your physical security of wherever your computer is. For laptops, though, I wouldn't want mobile users to like leave those plugged into their laptops. I always keep mine separate from my laptop, right? In case your laptop is stolen, you don't want to leave your YubiKey in it. Although you can disable, revoke that YubiKey pretty easily and quickly.
Personally, I'm not a huge fan. Like sometimes I'll be out at a coffee shop or at a, cigar bar or something like that. These will be at home and I'll need to log into GitHub or something like that. And, I forget to bring them. But I've got my phone with me.
Yes.
Like why can't I just use my phone? Why,
you can. Why? Again, that depends on what your how many layers of two-factor and options you've built into which applications, right?
Right.
And that's the hard part with multi-factor is the support across all of those.
Right.
If you're not in an enterprise that has some kind of single sign-on, system built in, or you've adopted a Ping identity or Azure SSO, or what's the big one? Well, I'm blanking on the name now. What's the big single sign-on?
Okta.
Okta. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so it's compatibility is definitely an issue. At first there were just a few browsers it was compatible with, and then if you're logging into a product through like a FAT client and it uses an embedded browser like on Mac or Windows, oftentimes those don't work with these, so you have to use an alternate method anyway. I'm like, if 25% of the time I'm using something other than these anyway, why? Why bother with another factor? I don't know. Somebody come at me with a good argument for security keys over just using MFA factors via your phone or something like that, or biometrics.
The issue I had with the phone was when you get a new phone, they wouldn't always transfer depending on which client you were using.
Yeah, so
they fixed that in more recent times as well, probably for just those reasons, right?
I'll admit my eggs are in one basket. I use 1Password. I used to use Authy, and Authy's easy because it syncs it to the cloud. So if you forget to move your tokens, no problem. It's synced them. All you have to do is reinstall Authy, as long as you remember your backup password. And these days I just let 1Password enter those the TOTP codes, and they're in there with all my passwords.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, obviously, with anything in security, it depends on what you're protecting.
Yeah, exactly. Next thing on the list here, we've got a open source tool released by Facebook for analyzing. It's like a static analyzer for Android apps and Java, which I think most Android apps still are written in Java these days. Mariana Trench is the name of it. And it's up on GitHub, or you can get binary releases via PyPy. Is that how you say that? PyPy?
Yeah, that's how I say it, which is probably wrong, but yeah, I think that's right.
They've previously released analyzers for Python also, a tool called Pysa, and another tool called Zonkoyan. Not sure what that's from, for hack code, which I didn't realize hack was a programming language. That was new to me. There's an interesting article here about how basically venture capital is kind of outrunning the industry's or the market's ability to exit some of these companies. So we're going to potentially see a whole lot more IPOs than we're used to seeing, because they're saying a lot of companies are cutting down on acquisitions because they're afraid of being investigated or broken up as monopolies.
Well, that's interesting. So, is that the VC firm is afraid they're going to be a monopoly and broken up?
No, the tech giants that are doing all these acquisitions. So the idea is,
I got you.
If tech giants like Facebook and Google and Microsoft slow down in acquisitions, VCs are, holding this bag, with all these companies they're hoping to get an exit from.
And their only exit for that is then to go IPO. because the big
either IPO or they can stay private, but then they can't get the return that they're looking for. So they need. I guess the other option would be private equity.
Right.
Could be another exit, but they generally don't give the kind of exits that VCs are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
They don't give that 20x, that 100x. They tend to go after the slow growers, but still good, and piece a bunch of those together.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe make an IPO out of that. So like we've seen happen with, who are the ones, FireEye and,
Mandiant.
No, they split up, but who did FireEye just get paired with? Why am I blanking on that? We were disappointed. RSA wasn't one of them, but it was FireEye and McAfee, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, McFireEye.
McFireEye.
So interesting report from the Atlantic Security Council, I think. Yeah, Atlantic Council. Put out this report on maritime security, and the TLDR is basically they get a lot of work to do. They're way behind, and the reason that it's timely to talk about now is attackers are starting to look at maritime resources as potential targets.
I think Larry was talking about this on Paul's Security Weekly, how you can spoof the location of a ship and things like that. Hide the location of a ship. There's all
AIS. I think is the protocol that you use, the what you use to actually transmit your location. So GPS is used, but it's not easy to spoof because if you spoof it, you have to spoof the entire area.
Mm-hmm.
So in like a busy shipping channel. Like you can't spoof GPS to run one ship aground. You're going to run them all aground.
Oh, I see.
But then they also have their AIS data, as kind of a backup for that. I don't think ships these days depend only on GPS. They've got some radio data.
That's curious. The history of that. And the reason I mention the history is because I'm reading the book Code Girls, and largely what the largely female workforce in World War II was doing in code breaking, which is the kind of the premise of the book, that many of the code breakers, 70+% were women, and they were trying to break the Japanese and German codes largely to gather where their ships were either are or going, right, or heading to. And so they're trying to decipher those codes and messages.
Yeah. Now, obviously, in the day and age of spy satellites,
technology has, of course, that landscape has changed dramatically. It'd be interesting to see how the history of like when all those changes were implemented and how it works today, and tie into how maritime security, why it's so poor today, and the importance of it based on the technology they're using.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard horror stories about the systems that work with that AIS data, that you use for for navigation, still being XP, CE, all kinds of horror shows like that. Obviously, they're not. I don't know if they're directly connected to the internet, but the threat to those things is not the same as an XP machine on a corporate network or anything like that. But still there's there's a full report that they put out, no registration or anything like that. You can just download it and thumb through it. But pretty interesting stuff. And our last story for the day is our squirrel story, which is all about space junk. So Steve Wozniak and Alex Fielding, I don't know who Alex Fielding is. Obviously, I know who Woz is, have a startup called Privateer that aims to both map and get rid of space junk.
Wow, that's cool. How do you get rid of?
I'm glad you asked. So some things that have been tried include nets and harpoons. Not even kidding.
Wow.
Yeah, just
like old school.
Taking that ocean going kind of sea naval analogy of space very literally. throwing out nets and using harpoons to get junk. So first of all, some context on how much junk is out there. I think I actually had an image for this. I actually found.
Please tell me it's not urine in space.
No, it's not.
That's a thing. And so you say in the description, astronauts have described watching urine being released into space as one of the most beautiful sights in orbit, which is just.
Yeah, because it crystallizes immediately. Like the moment it goes out there, It turns into beautiful crystals, and crystals are pretty, right?
Wow.
Especially when light passes through them.
Pretty pee-pee.
So yeah, there's 36,500 objects greater than 10 centimeters in size. 1 million objects between 1 centimeter and 10 centimeter.
Wow.
So that includes people have lost gloves, spatulas, wrenches. In one case, an astronaut lost an entire tool bag worth $100,000. The whole bag went missing, and it is apparently fairly easy to spot from the ground here on Earth. And then 330 million objects between 1 millimeter and 1 centimeter in size.
Wow, it's a lot of junk.
Yeah. So it's so funny, like reading about space junk, because things will burn up in the atmosphere. They kind of use that as like a trash incinerator.
Yeah.
So like when they upgraded the air conditioning on the International Space Station, they basically didn't need this 1,400-pound tank of ammonia anymore. So they just threw it out the window of the space station, basically, and just let it burn up in the atmosphere.
Wow.
But that's generally that's the ongoing general plan of dealing with space junk, is just having it deorbit back into the atmosphere where it's going to burn up.
Gotcha. I like ground-based lasers. I mean, you could turn that into a video game and just let people play. Like, that would be awesome. Well, except you wouldn't want them to incinerate a working satellite or something important. Yeah, 150 kilowatt laser, I think is what it was. So some pretty serious lasers. That's awesome. That sounds like fun. But yeah, talking about using magnets, robots with tentacles and stuff like that, talking about actually salvaging the junk orbiting the Earth and using it to build new things. So recycling. That's crazy. Is also an option. Also up there is Gene Roddenberry's ashes. I don't know if I mentioned that. Somewhere up there. Somewhere up there. Does that have a tracker? Does that have a tracker on it? I wonder. I would say it depends on how large it is. If it's larger than 10 centimeters, whatever it's in, then yes. But generally, the things that are smaller than 10 centimeters are not currently tracked, which is what this company is going to be aiming to do, is to track some of that smaller stuff and put together plans for handling it. Because it is starting to become an issue. Like within the last couple of years, satellites have collided with space junk. Space junk has taken out a few valuable things in orbit. Yeah. So it looks like you remember Wall-E when the ship breaks. Do we have that image? Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, it's starting to look like that. Mm-hmm. We're getting there. It's a huge problem. Glad Woz is on this problem. Yeah, me too. All right. Thanks so much, Paul, for joining me today. And a big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. See you next week.